All right, let's go. All right, let's go.
Well, shoot, Dave, it's really nice to have you on, man. Thanks for making some time. You know what I was curious about? I was driving in this morning. I knew I had you on the show today, and I didn't really first meet you or know who you were, right, until I kind of exited working with Dan over there at Kuebix. And by the time you came on, I think Trimble had already absolved or acquired, right? Or like right in that area. Like, where were you before that?
Yeah. So, right. As you were leaving Kuebix, I was coming in. That was 2017.
Yeah.
And Trimble had acquired Kuebix in 2020. So prior to that, I was an LTL guy. I was an LTL, many different providers, as most of us are in transportation. You know, you put your 2 or 3 years in and you jump. Yeah. And, you know, I'd actually started with Consolidated Freightways back in the early 90s in a management training program.
CF.
The big union providers. I worked with the family-owned companies, the asset light, like the Roadrunners. And so I had a good smattering of experience across transportation specific to LTL. And, you know, I still find myself around many LTL people. I guess that's how I came up. And so I find myself in a lot of LTL type conversations. But a natural transition from transportation or trucking into transportation management solutions. And so then I went into Kuebix. And as you know, Kuebix was a shipper TMS doing a lot of the things that my carrier does in their relationship with a common carrier, right? Yep. Inserting TMS into the shipper public of a carrier, and then providing analytics to that carrier. And I think it's a great model. And it's really one of the ways that Kuebix got to a point where they were acquired by Trimble. It made them very attractive.
Yeah. Well, that's too funny to me. I didn't know that you had spent that time at CF and everything, because I remember hooping in my driveway, and I was probably, maybe only 12 or 13. And my neighbor was Don, and he drove for CF. And he came back, and I was like, Don, why are you home? He goes, the gates were locked. Because a lot of people showed up to work, right? Remember, it was like that. At the top of a hat. They just shut down.
Yep. Conway came about. Conway, CCX, right? They were part of the whole CF thing, and Conway survived and CF didn't. And to your point, one day it just happened, and you saw one of those monster carriers, just like Yellow, YRC, right? That YRC acquires, or Yellow acquires Roadway. It takes 7 years or whatever it took to assimilate those operations. And what you find is, and I think quite often transportation loves top line revenue. The issue is that you wake up one day and you find out that operating margin is probably more important than top line revenue, and that happens all too often in the carrier market. And so Consolidated Freightway was that way, Yellow and Roadway were that way, and many more. And then depending on the way they're designed, many of these LTL carriers, if you're a union provider, you have different worries than non-union because of just your overhead. I think. Yeah, part of the issue that comes with that is the training, and union providers, I think, provide better training and some of those things, but it's more expensive to operate. And so,
probably 8 to 10 points of operating margin, right? Depending on any carrier with that, right? So you gotta take the good with the bad and work through that as a LTL carrier. But that's awesome, dude. You're pretty similar to me, where you had more of like a journeyman experience, right? You're kind of working for asset-based providers. You're getting the sales, the training, and then boom, we're in the SaaS world, right? Which I really think, because of that experience, it helps you connect the dots, right? Because you've lived that world. So when you saw like the SaaS or that side of the fence, it's like, oh, this totally makes sense. Right, I've been working with shippers forever on disparate functions and different platforms and things they got to use. And I think even the average shipper has to use about 3+ platforms to just book a single shipment today, which is crazy, right? They might have to get into their ERP or their WMS, carrier website. And before you know it, you've jumped through 4 or 5 hoops in this just fragmented workflow to process a shipment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's 2 things there. I'm a huge proponent of it takes one to know one, and to insert a player into an operation, regardless of the operation, whether that's in technology or supply chain operations, supply chain sales, I think it's very difficult to just insert someone. I'm all for education. I'm all for the academic piece. But if you don't come up on the dock, if you don't understand some of those pieces, it's much harder for you. And as you graduate into different roles, just like you did, you graduate into these more advanced roles and you start to work with many shippers. You work with many shippers on the carrier side, but then you work with many shippers on the technology side and you try to understand their current state, what they're doing, why they're doing it, where they want to go. And you find very quickly that, yes, they're using 3 or 4 systems. They're also using pen and paper. And if Bobby's not there today, I either text Bobby or it doesn't happen the way it should have happened and it's not efficient. And there's a whole cascade of events because we are using many systems, but we also use tribal knowledge. And that tribal knowledge, when it's not systemized, turns into many, many cascading issues, really all affecting the customer experience and ultimately the operating margin.
Oh, 100%. So I've actually got questions on some of the stuff you just said, but before we get into that, like tell me where you're at now and what you're doing. You're on to new ventures altogether. You've been with a couple different, SaaS providers from the Trimble. I think you spent some time at Shipwell, G2Mint, and now I think you're cowboying up and seeing what you can do on your own. So tell me about that.
Well, I just have this sense that I know something that needs to be fixed in the industry, and there's a couple things behind it. One thing is that AI is moving very quickly, but the foundational issue with AI is that the foundation is flawed. Right, information is bad, and we just talked about using 3 or 4 systems, using pen and paper, and then trying to make predictions. Regardless of the AI model you're talking about, whether it's agentic or machine learning, all of those pieces, they are built on a foundation. And if the foundation is cracked, you're going to have a very difficult time making a good decision. It will make your decision faster, but that either means you're very efficient much quicker or you're out of business a lot quicker than you would have been. And it can be a very good experience or it can be a very painful experience and an experience where you're really scratching your head trying to understand what is going wrong. We're doing all of these things, and to undo that is to really go back to the basics. And so what I'm doing right now is I'm building let's call it a matching app. It's a dating app between prospects and vendors, and it's quite simple, and it's back to the basics. I have to call Bobby to ask Bobby what Bobby really does, right? And so my carrier is a vendor in the market. And the issue with AI right now is that AI cannot tell the difference between what you actually do and what your aspirations are. And it's not deception on anyone's part, but the reality is that when companies are using their marketing teams to solicit new users, the issue with AI, and so I could Google or I could use some other search engine that say, I'm a shipper, I'm this kind of shipper, these are the modes that I use in all of these things. The issue is that the information that I get back when I use that search engine, it's very cloudy. And did you know there's over 100 TMS companies that, there's said to be over 200. I've identified 106 of them. And so tell me, what is it exactly that they do for a living that keeps them in business when I am from transportation and I am in TMS and I don't know who they are? I don't know who they are and what they do and how they come to market and how is it that they're surviving. And so what I've been doing over the last 6 months is interviewing each of these vendors to try to understand exactly what they do from a foundational level, right? Are you a shipper serving? Are you broker serving? What type of vertical are you good at? Are you good with food and beverage? Are you good with chemicals? The modes that you serve, are you really strong in LTL, parcel, truckload, right? And then I can go down at another level. If you can support, say, parcel, low volume, it's not the same as supporting high volume parcel, right? Because latency creeps in and some other things. And so I've built an application on the vendor side that allows the vendor to match up to the client needs. And so the idea really being is we start from scratch. I'm not going to inherit some generic RFP that I borrowed from three guys, or I went to a consultant and he's got this generic RFP that we've all received on the vendor side. Hey, fill this thing out. And you get into that first experience with the prospect and you only to find out, hey, you've got this whole section on ocean. Tell me about your ocean needs. And they don't have them. right?
Yeah.
And so you're starting off the wrong way. And so in my world, I've built a 14 section assessment for a prospect. Fill this out. This is your RFP, but this RFP stands across the vendor set. Now, on the opposite side, I have the same thing, right? And I've talked to you in the past, and I've talked to over 80 vendors so far about what they do foundationally. What do you do? Who do you serve? They fill this survey out as well. And I have an engine. I have 27 dials on this engine that marries them up. And so it will say, Mr. Vendor, I have a prospect for you that matches. Here's what the match looks like. Here's where you match. And just the opposite. So for the prospect, it's going to come back and say, Mr. Prospect, you have these 5 vendors that seem to match. And here's what their card looks like. Mr. Vendor, here's what the prospect card looks like. Why don't you meet? Right. Yeah. And they are going to be right. Gartner's got 16 players in the Magic Quadrant. Where's the other 84? What are they doing? And so this is an opportunity for me to just bring some of those operations to light. They're just not seen. I'm not a marketing site. I'm Switzerland. I hope everyone wins. I hope everyone gets a fair shake. But I don't lean one way or the other. I have ideas in my own head as to what I like. But that's not for me to say, because a very large food and beverage type client that has a very close looking competitor may be completely different the way they operate. And so one use case may be different, because all of these operations get to wherever they are, honestly, as they build, they make decisions along the way. And so when you get 15 years into an operation, one operation looks a little bit different than the other operation, because they're making the best decision that they can make for the time. 15 years in, or 20 years in, 30 years in, they look a lot different, right? One can be decoupled very quickly and easily if they want it to be, and one cannot, right? And so you have to meet people at their current state. When we understand what your current state looks like and where you're trying to go, the machine will tell you who the match is. And then from there, the vendor and the prospect can meet together.
Yeah. And you kind of hit on something that is kind of always irked me as this space has grown over the years, is that TMS, the term or phrase, is really an umbrella. And underneath that are several different categories, right? Not only that, but modalities. And I think it does become hard for a shipper, because when you hit some of the websites of these different companies out there, it looks like they do everything, right? They all have pictures of planes and boats and trains, and it's all on there. But it's like, what do you do well? And I think the other end of that is, what do you do and how does it perform? And then there's like, okay, what does implementation really look like, right? So like from the shipper's perspective, with your experience, what are some of the biggest fallacies you see that they have going into this? Because I've received bids like you have. And when I receive a bid, sometimes I'm like, tell me you don't know what you want without telling me you don't know.
Well, you just don't know what you don't know is the issue. I think you nailed it right there. One of the biggest things with a buyer, whether it's a shipper, a carrier, a broker, a tech company, a PE firm, they don't have a lot of experience buying. And so first things first, where do I find information internally, right? Before you even discuss or have that first conversation with a vendor or a potential vendor, who are you and what do you actually do? And can you actually capture the data? Find your data first. Have your data available, because, and I say this from the sales side, I spent a lot of time in operations, but as well as sales, you are negotiating before you even get to the table. So if you come to the table and you have disparate information and you don't know where or how to find it, you are at a disadvantage before you even start the negotiation. It's already going. You don't realize it. So you come to the table, understand who you are, what you're doing, where you want to go, understand your timelines, understand all of the BANT or the medic or whatever the things that you are trying to accomplish, understand those and be able to express those to the vendor set. That is the biggest issue that I see. And if you do those things, your statement of work, when you get there, and you will get there with one of the vendors, before I even talk about the statement of work, your sales process or that buying process on the buyer side will be so much smoother. It will be so much more transparent as to who you're working with and why. You will be able to say, Bobby, you're a fit, and Dave, you're not. very quickly, very easily, even though foundationally with my application, I'll give you the top 5 that match, but you're going to be able, because you understand your own house, you'll be able to get there much quicker, which leads you into a better SOW. If you understand together what the statement of work should look like, and if you understand that you're a shipper and that these are your modes and these are the systems and these are the integrations and who owns the EDI and the API and all of these things, this is your work and this is my work. If I have all of this on the table in the beginning of the process, then by the time I get to the statement of work can be very discrete. This is in scope, this is out of scope, this is phase 1, this is phase 2. And it does a lot of things for both sides.
Yeah.
If I understand everything that's in scope as the buyer, I am not surprised when Bobby tells me that, Dave, remember, that's phase 2. It's documented, but it's all right there as well. And I know that because we have those conversations. One of the biggest issues with any technology buy is the change behavior. What are we doing? Why are we doing it? If we communicate that everywhere within the organization, both organizations, and if we document it with the SOW and we follow that plan, then there's not surprises, because as soon as we get surprises, doubt creeps in. Doubt creeps into the buyer side. These guys aren't what I thought they were, or this is different than what I expected it to be. Your implementation team on the vendor side, they are people too, and they are having the same feelings. Bobby's hard to work with. Bobby wanted something that now the sales team didn't do this, or they could have done this better. And so when doubt creeps in, change behavior is slow, and ultimately ROI falls off, right? I expected a 14% cost avoidance in my net spend. Looks like I'm not going to get these pieces. And it all goes back to, did I provide good documentation from the beginning? Do I know who I am? Do I know where I want to go? Can I document all of the things? Because if I do all of those things on the front end, a little more work, you're going to do it anyway. So if you're going to do it anyway, how about doing it on the front end? Again, back to the buyer and the negotiating power and all of those things. I'm more in a driver's seat if I'm a buyer that shows up that way than not, because I ultimately end up being surprised. And again, you don't know what you don't know until you get there. And my goal is to help folks be better earlier so that they do better ultimately.
Yeah. Well, what's funny is you see this a lot in the ERP space, where you have a lot of reseller groups that maybe work exclusively with one ERP partner or several, to understand just that, right? Because when you're making these purchases, especially if you're upper mid-market to enterprise, it's not like you can rip this software out easy once it's in there, right? Like those buying cycles, like especially with an ERP, could be anywhere from 15 to 20 years, especially being cloud-based and updated now. And same thing with TMSs. So like when you make this decision and you go forward, it's a big deal that's going to impact the organization for many, many years to come.
Yeah. It's a very important decision, not just for your own livelihood, but for the operating margin of your company. It's that can't be said loudly enough. Yeah. If you make the bad decision, right? Even if you find that you made the bad decision, if it's an enterprise sale, it takes 6 months to a year to sell an enterprise TMS. It may take you, depending on the complexity, right? I've sold some very large enterprise deals that are quick, that are easy, right? It's just high volume. But others, and even down into the mid-market, they can be very complex. Yeah. And so it can take you 6 months, or take a year, or multi-phase implementation. No one wants to get into a 12-month implementation that turns into 18 months only to find out that, foundationally we didn't match. I liked Bobby a lot, but the thing is that I liked him, and I should have been really looking at the product against my need, right? Because once you meet people, people are people. People do business with people, and everyone tries to do their best for one another. I think the issue is that when you meet a vendor, it doesn't have to be a TMS, and it doesn't even have to be technology. If you're a potential buyer, make sure you're meeting people that foundationally can can match your need, right? And then go from there and then talk about those things, right? If I'm say a shipper and I have a very light tanker need, yes, it's on my periphery, but that's not number one. I want to know that Bobby can help me with some truckload. Hey, I have a little bit of truckload. Can you help me? I want to know that. But if I'm a high volume, I want to know that, hey, that's out of scope, or we have to talk about how we can implement that, how we can phase that in. If we're not having those kind of conversations on the front end, then we're really setting ourselves up for failure. And that's a failure for the vendor as well, because there's other things, vendors are serving two masters, right? I mean, on one side, you're on sales and you're trying to win the deals that you can win and you're trying to do the right thing for your company. Sometimes the right thing for your company is to not work with a particular prospect because you know they don't match.
And I don't think enough sellers, because they're so hungry for the sell and revenue, will get so far down the sales cycle and kind of hide or oversell what maybe certain modalities do, or maybe they're thinking like, if I get the sell, I'll have the revenue backing to actually build or finish the product.
Force the product to do the things. Yeah.
Yes, because, and make no mistake about it, like almost every organization out there has some level of pre-selling, right, going on, because you need to get the revenue to back the product. And sometimes you get down that pathway only to realize it's less than. And I think another thing that, and I'm curious on this from you, is sales has kind of changed over the year from dealing with maybe one or two stakeholders to buying by committee. And sometimes you get, different feelings about certain aspects of the process or life cycle of the shipment. And it gets really convoluted really fast. And I think like somebody like you who's a good seller can slow them down. But sometimes as companies, you got to realize that sometimes not everything fits in one box. And I want your opinion on this. Are you seeing more shippers be able to say, okay, I can go out there and get a really good truckload platform and feed it into my ERP. But, for LTL, they're not great. I'm going to go get this and have more of a connected ecosystem instead of like in the past when TMS started, hey, I need something that does everything. Even though it doesn't do everything phenomenally, it does it okay.
Yeah. And so there's two things that you mentioned right there. Number one, the buying committee. The buying committee is large, right? I mean, it's 3 to 5 people. I've always, in my experience in sales, it's important to have the group together for group events, for group exchanges. But it's also important to isolate the buyers. And this isn't a sales trick. This is a way to understand what it is that Bobby really needs to make his life easier, to make his operation easier, his role easier. And each of you do different things, right? Yeah. You might be the operator. There's a financial person. There's procurement. There's all of these players. What makes each of them satisfied in a purchase is going to be different. And so it's important for the vendor to understand that you need to understand the needs of each of these people, right? There's needs and then there's wants. And so that's number one. That's very important for the vendors to make sure they spend time there. And then what was your second piece, Bobby, that you were just mentioning?
Is that like a lot of larger, like I think a lot of shippers like to say, hey, I only want one solution.
Oh, right? Yes. Oh, yeah.
One solution doesn't hit every need on the nail. And it kind of goes into the buyers by committee, right? And you might realize, and this is why it would be important to have somebody like you, is to say, hey, for the spend you were going to apply to this or the budget that you had, you could actually work with maybe 2 separate platforms and have a way cleaner experience as long as the connective tissue is there and feeds back to your central repository. Because it's hard to do every modality really well. And I don't care who you work for or what you do. There's bodies buried in there somewhere, right? And it doesn't always come out in the sales process.
Yeah, I'm just a huge fan of integrating with the best tech out there for each of the pieces, right? I mean, if you're looking for security, you might use like a highway, right? And you do that from my perspective, because I'm in technology, I'm in supply chain. I think there's a shameless maybe plug for Highway. Good for them. I think what they have is a great product. But it's one of many, right? There's accounting softwares, there's factoring softwares, there's mileage softwares, mapping, and you name it. There's a particular software for all of these things. And there's some really, really brilliant people out there doing a lot of different things. And so from my perspective, I like the concept of integrating with these ancillary technologies. They bring high value where let's say a TMS, I look at that. I think in the hub and spoke kind of way, right? Mm-hmm. A TMS can be a very strong hub. It could be everything, right? Depending on your needs, right? If you're just a high volume truckload guy, you just need a TMS that can do the things, right? Whether it's contract or spot. But depending on your use case, you may have a need for some of these ancillary technologies. Don't pin that TMS company on building you a dock scheduling app or a yard app when there's yard management solutions out there that can do that for you and can do it so much better, so much quicker. Grab them, use them. All of the technology today, it's all API driven, right? And you mentioned it a little bit earlier about ERPs and ERP connectors and things like that. I think they're great. I think it's fantastic. And it's a great go-to-market when it makes sense. The big push a few years ago was, are you a NetSuite partner? Can you build the NetSuite connection? And so if you match that, I think that's fantastic. But what I also think is fantastic is that we have this ability, and it's not brand new, but it's catching on. I can just connect via API, right? And I could build a center where I could just grab a module. I want that module, that module, that module, and then I can maybe through an API key, I can sign in through that app and have access at least to the MVP of that functionality. And I think that's a great future state for many operations because today it works and tomorrow there's something better. And so if I could unplug from that ancillary technology and go to the next one, how great is that for the usership group? Where I don't have to your point about the ERP, it might take you this long and you could be there for 15 years. I can stay with that ERP company forever. And I could just tag on these other pieces that fulfill my operation. The second part of that is that it also allows you to move up, to move down, and move sideways in your own operation. If I have an opportunity as a client, as a shipper, whatever I'm doing, if I have an opportunity at a new piece of business, I don't have to go through all these iterations to understand whether or not it works. I can look at it simply and say, wow, if I just partnered with a 3PL warehouse or a 4PL warehouse, they could do a pick and pack. I could partner with this company to manage my e-com. And now it's not so hard for me to look at a different piece of business and say, I can do that. And not only that, but I can understand what my cost is. That's fantastic. If I go through growth, I have the ability to grow and maybe use other technologies. If I'm in a bad position where I have to retract my business, if I'm party to that kind of system using ancillary technologies, I can withdraw my operation, draw it back down a little bit, and do it quickly. And that's part of the problem in industry right now is that you don't have the ability to go up and go sideways and go down quickly or easily. And by the time you get to doing the things that you really need to do, your operating margin may be in real trouble. Yeah.
Now, let's venture into this one because I see this one a lot. And we're going to break this into two segments. One is like building the ROI case for this. And two is the opportunity cost of not only the sales cycle, but indecision on behalf of the buyer. Because you and I have been into some companies where I'm like, you need to make a decision now. Like I seem to be a great fit. And sometimes these deals will stall out. And I think part of it is they have a trouble justifying ROI for the budget, or it ends up that the solution and everything they want and what they thought they would budget for, right, has now really mushroomed or ballooned because you get buyers by committee and scope changes. And then before you know it, you've doubled your budget. And now you're just not making a decision at all. So like, how would you help shippers in that avenue, or what suggestions do you have around that end of it? Because if they let 5 of us in there, you're dealing with a lot of sales, a lot of different meetings, a lot of salary on meetings to make a decision and regurgitate a lot of the same information.
Yeah, the cost to sell is extremely high. And it really, to me, I'm a CRM guy. I'm a note taker. I want to understand everything. I've got a learner personality. I want to understand what it is that you do, what you want to do, but I also want to know what makes each of you tick. And if on the vendor side, you look at your clients in that way and you truly want to understand what it is that they're trying to accomplish, you've succeeded at probably the biggest piece. You have to understand them. You have to understand where they want to go, and you have to want to isolate them to understand what it is that is going to make their job easier. The reason these deals tend to lag and they slide, you've lost them in the sales cycle and you've missed something, right? There's no steps that you can skip. You have to go through the qualification. You have to go through discovery, which means you have to understand their persona and their modes and their systems and what their aptitude, what's the internal aptitude from a resource standpoint? Are they going to integrate? Are you going to integrate? Is it outsourced? If you don't answer all of those questions for yourself first and then fully explain to them what it looks like, remember, they buy 1 or 2 TMSs in their lifetime as supply chain professionals. They move every 2 to 3 years, just like the trucking folks do. So just as soon as you get into this, they're moving on. And so if when you get into that sales cycle, you are not succinct and you do not spend all of the time and effort that you can to make sure that everyone's on the same page, if you lose them and that sales cycle drags longer than the natural drag, you will never close that deal. That deal will, hey, what's going on with, we all have it, right? There's 5 accounts that I could probably name 5 right now that, hey, they're in the market. Yeah, they were in the market 12 years ago, right? Because they're always in the market because they can't seem to make that leap. Part of the reason is because they've been burned before, but they really haven't been burned. They just haven't done a really good job on the buy side. And part of that is really on the sell side, right? We haven't done a good job as sellers to make them understand, to make them feel comfortable. This is what you're doing, and this is why you're doing it. This is your decision. I'm helping you through it. These are the steps that we will take. If you can provide a very clear path as to what you're doing and why you're doing it, and you can explain that in terms for each of your 5 buyers in that buying group, if they can fully visualize what their role is, each of their roles are in this succession to the win, then you win the deal, right? And then the ROI, right? And we've got this generic, we've probably all used the same, hey, it's 5 to 15% for rating. And you've got all these different categories that can apply for ROI, the actual ROI. And that's a kind of a loaded issue in itself. What's the ROI? I don't know. It really depends on a lot of meetings with you. Let me understand what your current state is. Let me understand your carrier set and a lot of things, right? For me to understand that, hey, you know what, if we do these things, we can capture X. And if you take the extra step and look at your carrier set, right? I remember at Kuebix, I ran an RFP and, we saved them somewhere between $8 and $12 million. There's a big spread there, but somewhere over $8 million cost avoidance just by getting a different carrier set in there prior to even setting up TMS. And so there's a lot of interconnected pieces in supply chain. It's not just the technology. It's how you go about running your operation to start with.
Yeah. And I see a lot of shippers focus so heavily that, I need to save my money on what my rates or contracts are with the carrier. Meanwhile, when you and I get in there, we see that the process flow, and any flow is, if you just break it down into simple terms, it's just a series of tasks, right? And how are those tasks being executed? And how can we bundle those tasks to go through a series of an automated workflow? And how can I produce a workflow that maybe collects better information up front so you can get to that ROI point within your 4 walls and reduce time to task activities? And sometimes it's hard for people to justify ROI because they're like, well, I'm getting more efficient, but I'm paying these people anyway. And sometimes you get into that and it's like, listen, are you going to be more efficient or not? Because your competitors out there that are coming up that maybe don't have the legacy tech or are starting from scratch almost have an advantage on you by being more nimble out of the gate. So how are you going to keep current? And I see this all the time. And sometimes it's frustrating for me. And I'm like, listen, becoming more efficient saves money, period.
Yeah, I mean, let's face it, a lot of folks, they want technology because they hear about technology, but then they want to continue to do the things the way they do the things. And sometimes it makes sense and other times it doesn't. And sometimes it means others in your organization need to be privy to the organization. Just imagine the procurement type person that is, buying all day. Right. And you're imagine a manufacturer that's buying a lot of raw goods from the same vendor over and over. And by the time you look at your order management system and you see 5 different orders, you've got 12 different customer service folks in there and they're buying all day.
Yeah.
If they don't have access to the ability to order consolidate and do something like that, right? That's magic right there. It's all sitting there. You just have to give the visibility to the folks that are actually managing that. Or you have to set the integrations up such so that when those orders come into the application, they're visible to the supply chain operator so that they can make a decision with that, whether that's fully automated or not. First things first, you need visibility. And then you need analytics on the back end that say, hey, we did that well, or hey, we could have done that better. Those 2 things are important. The more important piece is we actually have to act on these things.
Yeah.
And that's the other piece I think that happens is we talk a lot about analytics on both sides. We set the application up and we set all of the analytics up. If you don't do something with that analytic set, and most TMSs at this point, they're really exception driven. Right? Tell me where the exception happened. If you're not taking those exceptions, going back to the root cause and fixing those, that's where your next 5% cost offset is. It's those little pieces. And so you think about that first year. What's my first year? Hey, it's going to take me 8 months to break even at 8 months. And then I start, and you can build all the beautiful graphs that you want about how you're going to hit all these things. At a certain point, you're going to hit year 2, year 3, whatever it happens to be. If you want to understand how you continue to draw value, you continue to draw value by continuing to drill down into the analytics and having all of these. Now, at this point, you have a lot of data points. Have your data tell you a different story, a different way. Make those numbers, have them hit each other, have it tell you a different story so that you can go back and find a way to make it more efficient. Maybe it's a different facility. Maybe it's a product belongs somewhere else. Maybe my bulk internal transfers have to be volume instead of, hey, every Tuesday, Thursday, why don't we do it once a week? Or, and just because we've always done it this way doesn't mean you can't call a customer and say, hey, we've got you every Monday, Wednesday. Is there a reason this looks like it was set up 5 years ago? No, you guys, you could do it once a week, or you could do it once every 2 weeks. A lot of the things that we do because it was set up that way before we came in. And again, if we're turning over every 2 to 3 years, the decisions that we made 5 years ago, that's 3 people removed. And so let's make sure that we're talking to our customers and our vendors and making sure that the things that we are doing are things that make sense still today, because businesses evolve.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And
that's non-TMS, but that's one of those pieces that goes into, hey, what are we doing? You can systemize all the things in the world. If it doesn't make sense, you don't have to put it into the computer. It still doesn't make sense.
Yeah. I pulled my hair out the other day working with a shipper who had $10,000 a month in, reway reclass fees. Right. Ooh, and I got him set up with a mobile dimensioner from Dockware. They were using it. And he goes, I just don't have time to scan the pallets. And I'm like, dude, you're doing like 10 a day, but you have time to pay $10,000 in overages. Like, make that make sense to me. So let's talk about another avenue in procuring a TMS or a platform that works for you. Do you ever see shippers kind of forget about what I'll call external considerations in the avenue of the delivery partners? Because not all TMSs communicate or work with those external carriers in the same way, right? And so you make a decision that you feel is really good for you, but then externally out there, it could potentially upset the apple cart depending on how that TMS transmits information to those carriers, right? Or all of a sudden it's like you portal a carrier to death and they're working harder to maintain your business. Do you see that at all, shippers forgetting to make considerations about the folks they're communicating with, i.e. their carriers, delivery partners, regardless of modality?
Oh, absolutely. And I think EDI is really one of those those points that come up all the time. And I was talking to a TMS, a founder of a TMS that I think he's built something that's fantastic. And he was working with a vendor, and in the sales cycle, he didn't think to even talk about EDI and the cost of EDI and who will manage EDI. And so you get into the implementation, and already, as I mentioned earlier, change behavior and all of the things that make a thing go well. You're already at odds, and now it's tenuous, right? Yep. Hey, I don't want to upset Bobby. It's a brand new relationship, but I've missed this major piece. How do I manage this, right? And so that again is on the vendors. That's the vendor's job, right? Yeah. You have to help educate. You have to be there. Yes, you're there to help your company gain revenue, but you have to be a good business partner to help them get there. And I can tell you that is one of the main pieces that I work on with my company. I want to eliminate the ability for let's say a shipper to be misaligned foundationally. If you are a shipper and you are going to work with, depending on your use case, and it comes out that you have all of these ancillary needs, and you're open to working with a core, a hub and spoke kind of solution, I don't want to align you with a company that isn't aligned that way, right? Amen. Because that is the core focus of what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to shave that sales cycle. I'm trying to shave that buy cycle. I'm trying to improve decision making both for the buyer and for the vendor. I'm trying to shorten that. I'm trying to make a more discrete SOW, a better relationship, and better ROI for both teams, because it makes no sense for you to engage with a prospect for 4 months only to find out that, I thought maybe we could do all of the, why? You don't serve that mode, or you don't work that way. And so you've just spent, 3 months, 4 months in a sales cycle that you really had no business being in, but because you serve a different master and the revenue, and it looked like it was a big deal, all the things, right? And, but you get to a point where I'm trying to save you from doing that, because it's not time well spent. Because even if you do win, it's almost worse if you do win, because you're in that category B where you get 6 months into the implementation and people are throwing their hands up, and then you're getting a black eye, right? It's not that you're a bad TMS, you weren't a fit, but now you get a black eye for it. You can't get a reference, you can't get a case study, right? The buyer is upset, and so it all continues. And then the buyer says, oh, I don't like to buy technology because it's hard. Well, sometimes you just need help. You just need either help from an outside party, or you need help from a vendor that understands that the buying experience is very difficult. You don't know what you don't know is one of the biggest problems on the buy side. Yeah,
I couldn't agree with you more. Well, Dave, I think you're definitely fulfilling a need in this industry. I can't wait and really hope you get some traction and the rubber meets the road here, because I definitely see this as a need. It's definitely a huge space in the ERP world, but not really a big space within the TMS world, right? And that's why I think it creates a lot of confusion and convolutes the process. So tell me, like, if there's a shipper out there watching this, or anybody who wants to engage with you, where do they find you? How do they reach out to you? How do they get you involved to help them get through this process, so we don't waste time and money, we don't lose opportunity cost, and we have a marriage that works?
Right. So you can reach out to me, PreShiftIQ.com. That's my website. You can reach there. You could reach out via LinkedIn. I'm fairly active on LinkedIn. And hey, the first step is just a conversation. Who are you? What are you trying to do? And right now, I have a paper form that's available. I'm maybe 2 weeks away from going live with the application. I've got the matching engine. I've got 91 vendors that I uploaded that are pretty close. I'm going to go through them one more time to make sure that they're accurate. But the vendors are available within the application. At this point, it's really, you just have to go through and fill out the assessment. You have to spend the time, talk about who your operation is, and then we'll go from there. And I'll be available to guide a prospect in that marriage, and then gladly hand them off to the vendor set. That's really what I'm trying to do. But I'm trying to help those buyers understand that they have to look at buying just a little bit different. And it starts by bringing your house in order right? You have to know who you are and where you're going first. And a lot of times, and hey, tell me about this mode. And well, I can find that. And then 5 calls later, they're still trying to find that information. They are not ready to buy, and they have to be ready to buy.
Yeah.
And so I'm available LinkedIn or on my website. You can ping me and I'll be happy to engage.
Awesome, man. Well, it was great catching up with you. We locked in about 45 minutes, man. Got to unpack a lot of this. So I want to have you back on after you get this thing live, and maybe we can showcase how this really works and talk about some success stories here. So I'm looking forward to see you go out there and be very successful, Dave. So that's awesome, man. Thanks for coming on with us today.
Thanks, Bobby. Hey, I appreciate it. Take care.
Bet.